Welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast, free agency edition here. I'm Tommy Jaggi, your host, editor of stillcurtain.com. Joining me as always is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We've got some stuff going on, Shayne, these last couple of days here. Beginning of free agency, the first couple hours there, people were getting a little bit antsy, I feel like, especially after Cameron Sutton got poached within the first 2 hours and the Steelers were kind of sitting there for a little while. That really picked up. We're going to talk about every move that the Steelers have made so far as we're doing this live recording. We're going to break down each one, what it means for the Steelers, and then what it could potentially mean for the future in terms of anything else they do in free agency, and also how it changes things in terms of the NFL draft. Shayne, let's first start, though, by we're going to real quickly hit some of these big topics around the NFL right now. Jimmy Garoppolo to the Raiders. What do you make of that one?
I'm confused a little bit because I understand moving on from Carr, trying to reset that position. Although I think Carr's probably a better player than he showed last year, and I think he'll still be a good player for a while. I understand deciding to go in a different direction. You had a down season. You really have to kind of readjust expectations, all that good stuff. But paying Garoppolo, not a bad contract because, again, a starting quarterback, which he is, I think, at least around a starting quarterback level still, isn't going to be cheap no matter who it is. It just isn't, right? Unless you're drafting somebody, which is what we kind of thought they would do. And they still could, obviously, with this move. It just feels like it's not really moving the needle at all. I would have rather paid Stidham even to stick around for a year or two. He ended up going to, I believe it was, I forget which team. Oh, the Broncos to back up Wilson. Even signing a guy like him to be a bridge for a year or two behind a rookie or in front of a rookie, that would have probably been a better allocation of resources for a team that really needs to get more talented on defense, especially. And there's a lot of talent to be had in this free agency class. We've seen a lot of teams really load up on defense because of it. So I think that it was probably not so much it's a bad contract or even a bad fit. I think it's just going to be, was it the right allocation of resources for 3 years on a deal for a quarterback that isn't probably going to change your outlook for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I get what they're trying to do, Shayne. It's just
too.
like, what is it going to accomplish in the grand scheme of things? I mean, I think we all know that the Raiders are not a Super Bowl contender this year.
Right, exactly.
And so, and from their viewpoint, maybe it's just we need to sell tickets. I don't know.
Maybe.
So you don't have Derek Carr anymore. You need at least a face in there that can get you to be a competent football team. And from that standpoint, I would understand. Eventually, they're going to have to just correct this ship and just start from scratch. I think they're gonna have to find that guy, that long-term answer, because I don't think that Garoppolo is going to be it. And I think that, I mean, it's nice pairing him with McDaniels, but I think what we've seen with Garoppolo though in his career is it's required 2 brilliant head coaches, and even then I think he's just an average starter at best. And so I don't think they're getting much more than that. Interesting decision to go from Carr to Garoppolo. I think they can get out of that deal as early as next year and save like $18 million.
Theoretically, they can. Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they still made a play for Levis potentially, or whoever quarterback ends up falling in the draft this year. Cowboys parting ways with Ezekiel Elliott. I think this one was long overdue. The problem is they just couldn't get out of his bad contract until right now. I just think this is more proof, Shayne, why you shouldn't sign running backs to these deals. And like we've already seen this offseason, the Titans are open to trading Derrick Henry, supposedly, and the Browns are supposedly open to trading Nick Chubb. And those 2 running backs are even better than Elliott is right now. And so it's just one of those situations. It's like, all right, what do you do here? You draft a running back high, you feel like you have to pay the guy.
I think for this situation, obviously, this deal was bad from the get-go. And it really doesn't matter how good Elliott was or wasn't, because he was fantastic in the early part of his career. I'm not going to argue that. I think Cowboys fans will say the same thing, obviously. But when you choose to allocate that much money, which was $16 million, which, again, unless you are a true offensive hub, like a McCaffrey type, it's just hard to really justify that to begin with, no matter how good the running back is. But even more so, I think the biggest thing is this contract really wasn't structured in a way that made sense for the Cowboys, because they've had to wait to this point to be able to afford to basically move on from them. So I think the key, honestly, and some of these other teams are looking to maybe move on from running backs too. With Henry, I think it's more of just they've kind of really put him through the ringer, and they think that maybe it's best to just kind of not ride that train anymore. But I think the key to this is if you're going to sign a running back to a second contract, if you really like the guy, if you think you can't easily replace what he does for you, it's really about structure. If you can get a deal in the $10 million-ish range at the top of the market for running backs, which I think for running backs that aren't like the McCaffrey types, the Barkley types when he's healthy, that's reasonable to pay them that much. But you have to structure it in a way where most of that money is paid out guaranteed wise in the first 2 years. Because I think usually, you sign a guy to a 4-year contract for a running back in a second contract, you can get 2 years out of him. Like they got 2 good years, I'd say, out of Elliott really after that contract started. It was after that it became a problem. If you can do that, I think signing your running back isn't a problem. It's just making sure you're doing the right salary cap movements with that contract. So.
Yeah, and I think that this was a necessary move for Dallas. It was one we can kind of see on the horizon there. And honestly, I think they kept the better running back. I think Tony Pollard was fantastic last year prior to the foot injury.
He's hoping to get back healthy. Yeah.
Yes, he needs to get back healthy, and he's right around the 10 million mark because Dallas franchised him. It'll be interesting to see if they try to go that same route again with trying to draft another running back high and kind of go through that process. I know what the Joneses like to do there, but it seems a little bit like of an outdated method. I don't know. I don't know where Bijan's going to end up going in the draft, but that's a potential landing point that because I can see that being like, oh, well, Elliott's gone. We get a guy back on a rookie contract. We've only got Pollard for one more season. So I don't know. That'll be interesting to see what happens there. Baker Mayfield signed with the Buccaneers.
This one's tough because I think Baker acquitted himself pretty well with the Rams overall, considering their situation. I think it's with him. The problem is, what are your expectations, right? If the expectation is he's going to get us through next season, he's a better quarterback than we have in the roster. We're not paying him even $10 million. That's fine. I think the deal makes a ton of sense because there's enough potential with him where you're like, hey, maybe in the system, maybe he figures something out. Maybe he works on some of the issues he's had. If he's given the job right away with a team that does have weapons still, with Evans and Godwin, all those guys, maybe he can produce enough to kind of prolong his career. If the expectation is, oh, he's succeeding Tom Brady and we're going to see what he's going to do, like that's not the expectation here. And that's the good thing. He's not being paid so much that like if he goes out and has like a, 20 touchdown season, like throws for like 3,500 yards, like nothing spectacular, but he gets them 7 or 8 wins in that weak division, then that's probably what you wanted. That's probably what they're looking to do. So I think the move makes sense because it's cheaper than going after like a Garoppolo or some of these other guys. And they're not in range to draft a quarterback that at least I think could play right away. Right. So to me, this is just kind of a Band-Aid situation. And then hopefully for Baker Mayfield's case, maybe he can make his case as a starter again next year, or whatever happens. But it makes sense to pay him this much money just to go out and kind of play out the string.
Yeah, I was in favor of this move, Shane, because I think the price is right. You're getting a guy that the former number 1 overall pick, who has the experience, played in a couple different systems now. And again, the Bucs, as bad as they were last year in making the playoffs with a losing record, they played themselves out of a position to get a quarterback this year because they did too well in the NFL's worst division. And so I think the time is not quite right. It probably will be by next year even to land their future quarterback, but stopgap guy. And I'm okay with that for them.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers is starting to annoy me, Shane. I'm so sick of all the drama just goes on and on, I feel like. And so the latest with Rodgers, he came out basically and said that the decisions made on his part, it's going to be up to the Jets and the Packers to figure things out. Am I right, Shane?
So basically, what he said on Pat McAfee's podcast and everything in his show that he does, he basically went on and said that right now his decision was made, I believe he said Friday, that he wanted to join the Jets. It's really just been since then about the Jets getting the pieces that it seems like he wants, like Lazard and these other guys, and the Green Bay Packers and New York Jets figuring out the compensation, because this is the tricky part, because both sides know what Rodgers wants. Packers clearly don't want him around, right? We know this. They kind of made that pretty clear. It's just going to be how much are they willing to allow, like what are they going to need to get rid of him essentially, because they can't let him be on the roster at this point. Like it can't happen. They clearly want to see what Jordan Love can do. I honestly kind of want to see what Jordan Love can do. I was relatively high on him coming out.
Yeah.
It just needs to happen. And it's just at this point, what is it going to take? Is it, a 2nd round pick and maybe a future something? Is it their first this year, which I think would be probably not ideal, but if that's all you need to give up, then fine, whatever. That's really what it comes down to at this point, is compensation. I think it could drag on a little bit because I feel like the Packers are going to try to make the Jets sweat a little bit and have to think about what are they going to do if they can't get him for some reason or whatever else. But I think it's ultimately going to happen, and it's just going to, like I said, come down to those two teams figuring it out together.
Yeah, I'm ready for it to be done. I think it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time because, I mean, at this point, I don't see how the Packers can go back to him, like you've said already. And we don't often see a player. I know Rodgers is a great football player, going to be a Hall of Famer. how often does a 39-year-old get to dictate what's happening in the front office on another organization? Like we don't see that very often. His personality rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I'm interested to see him if he does go to the Jets. I'm interested to see what that looks like. They got a lot of young weapons over there. I think he can turn that around relatively fast. They've got New York had a great defense last year, so it won't take a lot to help turn that offense around with the talent that they have in place. Last one, Shane, we're going to talk about the Steelers because that's what's important right now. Favorite outside signing so far in free agency, and what I mean by that is from a different team. Like, who's the player that a different team signed that you are a big fan of right now?
I think I'll say a team first of like what I kind of like that they've done so far, and then I'll say a player that I think makes sense. I really like the fact that the Bears have just said, you know, we have all this money, we're going to go ahead and spend it. Because that's what the Jaguars did last year, and you saw what it got them. They're trying to do the same thing of like, we're going to load up this defense, we're going to load up on talent. And yeah, some of it is it probably overpaid. Like, would I pay Edmonds $18 million a year? Probably not, but he was the best linebacker on the market overall. I think he has the highest potential, and he's still young, so I get that. And the linebacker market outside of him was really good, so that's cool too. I think they managed to really come out, well there. They really went after it. And I really appreciate that from a team that knows they have the money, knows they have the young quarterback that they're trying to develop. They need to figure out, is this team as it's currently constructed with him as a quarterback, can they win? And I think next year they're going to have the opportunity to do that, especially with the Vikings kind of tearing things down a little bit. Lions, I think, will be better. And the Packers, that's really hard to say what their situation is going to be with Love and everything else. I think it makes sense to go for it this year. And then probably, I would say my favorite outside signing, and it's a familiar face. And I think it's just because it makes them so difficult to even remotely run against or play against at all. The Niners bring in Hargrave, even at that contract. That defensive line, I don't know what you do is not like even an offensive line as good as like the Eagles, some of these other teams that have great offensive lines. It's just so much pressure to deal with. Like if that team is healthy and they can stay together for a full season, I'm really curious what kind of numbers they can put up and what kind of defensive output they can have, because the secondary is not bad. Obviously, they have good players there too, but that front seven especially, and really the front four now that they have added Hargrave. There's not many teams that can handle that type of line. I think it's a really interesting move to go ahead and go for it again, like the Niners have been trying to do.
Yeah, and adding Hargrave to that, it just doesn't seem fair.
It makes it crazy.
Coming off of his best season and put him on the best defensive line in the NFL. And so that one, I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I'll go a little bit different direction, Shane. I really like Jamel Dean. And this is a player who I thought that he was probably my top overall free agent in the class in terms of what he offers at the cornerback position. He's 26 years old. He's got legitimate 4.3 speed at 6'2". He's played all 4 of his years so far have been really a really solid sample. And the guy goes for $13 million per year back to the Buccaneers. What an absolute steal for them to be able to get him back. They weren't expecting that. He took a little bit of a pay cut. He was rumored to be in the $17 million range that other teams were offering him. So I really like that the Bucs were able to retain him. I think that's a great move, great signing for them. Probably going to lose Sean Murphy-Bunting. All right. If you are popping in live right now, go ahead and give us a question in the chat if you want to. We'll see if we can go ahead and get to that as we are doing this breakdown. So Shane, let's talk about the Steelers free agency so far. We're going to break down everything individually and then kind of give your overall thoughts and what you think in the direction the team has gone so far. So let's start with Cameron Sutton. We're going to do the additions and the losses. We'll kind of do them mostly in order of how they happened here. Steelers within the first 2 hours of free agency, they lost Sutton to the Detroit Lions. I know a lot of people are upset that the Steelers didn't try to go maybe a little bit higher. 11 million price point per year is pretty steep for a cornerback too. Sutton's coming off a good year though. What do you make of the situation? Did the Steelers do the right thing? And ultimately, obviously they ended up signing a corner we're going to talk about next. But what would you have done in that situation? And would he be gone if you were general manager?
I think that the fact that he got 11 million, while it is pretty steep for a player who isn't a true CB1, he was still our CB1, if that makes sense. I think he's the only player on the roster last year that you could confidently say going into next year, is an above average starter at corner, right? Whether that's slot, outside, that versatility is nice as well. I think if you had to pay him 11.5 or just match it even if he wanted to return to Pittsburgh, which we really won't know that until maybe he talks about it or whatever else, that would have been worth it to me just to say, okay, I know I have that locked down. And then I can figure out in the draft, or I can add someone else or whatever else may be the case. But I would have tried to keep him. Now, do I understand to a certain degree why they didn't want to pay that much money for a guy that isn't, like I said, number one? Sure. But it just puts more pressure on the secondary now for them to draft somebody maybe with their first pick or their second pick, when we kind of already want them to do that anyway, possibly, but it puts more of an emphasis on that, even with the signing we're going to talk about next. I think it doesn't change much with their signing they did make.
Yeah, I think the number came in pretty close to what I was thinking, Shane. And I remember looking at some projections before this. Like, I thought Spot Rack was way off the mark when they said 7.6 per year in money.
Yeah. No.
So we knew he was going to get higher than that. We've seen with the cornerback market and how it explodes like this. People need corners. I mean, you need 3 or 4 good corners.
Lions especially need corners.
Yeah, even without injuries.
For them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure it does. And I think that Sutton's going to be a good player for them. I think the best is probably still left in the tank these next 2, maybe 3 years for Sutton. I would have liked to see the Steelers get him back. And that's kind of where I drew the line right in my head. I'm like, the $11 to $12 million range is what I'm going to say. I think I'm going to tap out here somewhere right around that. And so I don't have a problem with the Steelers kind of letting that one go. My issue, Shane, is we'll talk about the next player here, but with that money, my preference, and this has kind of been me all along, and I think that ship has sailed obviously at this point, but I would have liked to get a little bit younger on the defense side of the ball. I would like to get maybe a cornerstone football player and one that you can kind of build around and say, hey, I'm going to have this corner for 4 or 5 years, or at least 3 years. Steelers didn't go that route. And so let's talk about Patrick Peterson, Shane. This one kind of threw people through a loop here. I don't think anybody was expecting Steelers to go out and sign a big name. And if this was like 4 years ago, I would have been really, really excited about that. Now, I think the Patrick Peterson signing does come late in his career. However, he's coming off a 5 interception season. He played all 17 games, so he showed that he can stay healthy. Doesn't have the athletic traits like he did earlier in his career, and he turns 33 years old this summer. I've done a lot of studies, Shane, on cornerback shelf life. 32, 33, that's it. I don't care who you are. You're essentially washed at that point. Like Darrelle Revis retired after his age 32 season. And even a year and a half before that, he was really struggling. And so he's already operating on borrowed time, if you will, Peterson. And so I don't know how much he has left in the tank. I know that the Steelers played like the 5th most man coverage last year. So how do you see this one playing out?
I think it's really tough because, like you said, most corners, they just don't play well at this age. And I think his elite athletic gifts early in his career has given him a little bit more room to drop down, which does matter a little bit, because again, when you go from being one of the best athletes in the sport to like a mid-level athlete, which is probably about where he's at now, you have more room to fall, which does give you, like you said, borrow you a little bit more time. But I think the biggest thing is you can tell in this past couple of years, zone coverage is where he lives, right? Like, and you talked about how we run a lot of man coverage. That's my real biggest concern, and my biggest question right off the bat when I saw the signing is, are we going to move to even like a more, every team runs more zone than man, but are we going to run more zone than last year? We're going to try to get maybe to the middle of the pack running man. Like that would kind of make sense given our personnel at the moment. So I wouldn't hate that. Yeah. But at the same time, like if we're not going to do that, they cannot ask him to run man very much. They just can't do it. Like you look at any snaps he's had in man the last few years, this isn't the same player that used to shut guys down. And that's okay. You can make use of a player that's really smart, that has the good zone instincts, that's a playmaker, and that's something that we emphasized in the past. And last year we were leading in interceptions, so we definitely took that to heart. There's definitely room for this signing to make a lot of sense, especially in the first year of it. Second year, that's where, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. But at the same time, like I could see this working out. It's just really going to be determined by how we approach the defensive scheme moving forward. If we ask him to run a lot of man like we did last year, I just feel like the contract, even though it's totally reasonable, it's probably going to look bad.
Yeah, and the way that it's structured, Shane, is very much in a way that the Steelers have an out after the first year. The cap hit's very reasonable this year, 4.1-ish million, if I remember off the top of my head here.
Nothing bad at all.
And then, but that spikes up to nearly 10 million next year, over 9.7 million, with a $3 million roster bonus due on the 4th day of the new league year. And so the Steelers have to make their decision before that point to say, okay, is this guy going to be part of our team for one more year before he hangs up his cleats, or is this it? Are we getting one and done? And I think a lot of that's going to depend on how he performs this year. Like if he played like he did with the Vikings and he can take the ball away 5 times and get his hands on 10 other passes, then I mean, I think that's good enough reason maybe to stick him around one more time, have him mentor somebody else. This is not a long-term signing. This is certainly what you'd call a stopgap signing. Yeah. It's win now mode for sure. And the thing is, Shane, I just don't know if the Steelers are ready to win now. At least
yeah.
not win it all. And I think
Yeah.
that they could potentially sneak into the playoffs. I think that they could get their roster in a position to do that. But I do think that it's curious because I think that Patrick Peterson on a team like the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Bengals, a team that is legitimately ready to make that push right now. And again, it's about who offers the money. And the Steelers offered him a little bit higher than the number I thought a good soon to be 33-year-old cornerback is going to come in at. He is coming off a solid season. I believe he ranked like 12th or 13th in Pro Football Focus overall grade last year. So it's not bad. The sample we saw was not bad. He just needs to be, I think, Shane, in order for this to work out, he needs to be like at least Sutton level for this year, I would say.
Yeah, if we wanted to make sense, it would have to be that. And I think, again, if used correctly, I think it's totally possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be
Yeah.
can Terrell Austin or these other guys on the defensive staff, can they put him in the right positions to use everything he's learned? Because he talked about it, he's like, I'm not the same guy, like, but I have all the knowledge. I'm a really smart player at this point and know what teams are trying to do to me. So there's potential there for sure. But I do wonder if it's going to be one of those things where it's like, maybe that was not really worth the money at the end of the day. So.
And I think that Terrell Austin is going to have to cater towards him a little bit. You make a
He
signing
will,
like
yeah.
this, and he's projected at this point to be your number one cornerback. Are you going to really run as much man coverage as you did last year and potentially have him not look nearly as good in terms of the advanced statistics, Shane? Peterson was in the 98th percentile in terms of his grade for zone coverage.
Yeah.
He dropped all the way down to the first percentile in terms of his grade for man coverage. So it's that drastic
100%,
of a difference.
like it's a
at this point in his career. And he
yeah.
used to be a guy that was phenomenal at man. It just doesn't have the tools in his toolbox there anymore like he used to. Let's talk about DeMonte KZ. The Steelers did get a safety back. I don't know if it's the one that everybody was projecting. I was kind of going back and forth. I'm like, the Steelers are going to get one of these guys back. Just don't know which one it's going to be at this point in time. And I didn't think that there was a massive market for Edmonds because we saw last year he came off a solid season and still he lasted almost up until the NFL draft. The Steelers signed him for $2.5 million. So, and even right now, Shane, I don't think that getting Edmonds back is completely out of the question. I think it lessens that chance though, because you do have KZ. But I think at the very least, they have their bases covered. A pet peeve of mine, Shane, something I just do not like to do. And I know that it's worked out for the Steelers in the past. They've been very, very fortunate as any team in the league when it comes to safeties, because you go from Polamalu, little gap there, and then you trade and you get Minka. It's not like that for most teams. And most teams that spend first round picks on safeties end up being very disappointed with what they end up getting. And so I wanted at least something to cover their bases. I'm not the biggest Brian Branch fan. I just don't value that player as much. I'm looking for those premier positions that you could really have a cornerstone football player. And Branch is a good player. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad the Steelers at least have KZ done, so it gives them some flexibility early in the draft.
Yeah, and I think this doesn't prevent them from bringing Edmonds back. I still think that's definitely something they should look to do, because not only did those trio really play well together when they were able to play together last year, it just gives you a little bit more flexibility because Edmonds can come down in the box. He can help out with some of the linebacker duties, especially because we don't know exactly what their plan is still with that. We'll talk about a signing they finally made, which is good, but we still don't know exactly what their full plans are for linebacker. So Edmonds coming back would help that, but definitely glad to see that KZ at least is back, because I think he's their best option at true safety last year other than Minka, because Edmonds is more that hybrid type of player. So it gives them another guy that can rotate in the back end, allow Minka to kind of move around and do different things if you want him to. So that was definitely big for them to get him back, at least, if nothing else.
Yeah, that I agree. That's just a necessity. I think he does so many things well for the Steelers, and he can cover the slot. He can play free safety, strong safety, and he did so at a high level. I mean, he had an 81 grade in the games that he played last year, earned 2 picks, even though he didn't play in the first half of the season at all because of the injury he suffered during the preseason. I was pleased with KZ. Again, I think more of a stopgap option, if anything, but at least a guy that we know can help them out. Let's look at Nate Herbig. The Steelers go and signed an offensive guard from the Eagles, from the Jets. I haven't watched a ton of his film. Like, I'm going to dive into that here soon, but this is a big guy. This guy, very, very, he's the anti Kendrick Green.
Yeah, I saw you tweeting.
Like this, yes. Well, you think about like the Steelers, they were very adamant for a while there about getting not necessarily smaller, but quicker, faster, more nimble for those reach blocks, getting to the second level, that kind of stuff. That is not Nate Herbig. That's not where he excels. Now he can get to the second level. He's just nowhere near the athlete that a player like Kendrick Green is. Now where he's better is he's much more powerful. Like we're talking about a nearly 6'4", 335-pound mammoth up front here at the guard position who just bowls you back in the run game. He had the 6th highest run success rate among all NFL guards last year. That's where you want to be, right on that list. I don't know. I've got to go back and watch this film in terms of what he offers in terms of pass protection. I do know that he did not grade out very well last year, only earned a 58 overall grade. If you value that at all, but it's one of those signings where it's like, this is borderline starter money. It reminds me a lot of Mason Cole last year. And we're like, all right, who's going to be the center for the Steelers? Well, it ended up being Mason Cole. So what are your thoughts on Nate Herbig? Does he knock Kevin Dotson out of the starting lineup there? And how do you view him moving forward?
I think in a best case scenario, he pushes Dotson to be the best version of himself, right? Assuming we don't add any other guards in the draft or in free agency, that could replace him outright. I think that he at least gives him somebody that he has to actually go out and beat, because he beat Kendrick Green last year. But did he really beat him, or was he just an NFL player and Green isn't?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the problem with it. It technically was competition. I think that was purposeful. They wanted to try to push him, but do you think Dotson really felt pushed by Green? I don't think so personally. No offense again, we pile on Kendrick Green, but that's just kind of is what it is. That's where he's been in his career so far. But I think that Herbig ideally is your backup guard, right? He's the guy that has the versatility. He's played mostly right guard, but he can play left guard, even play a little bit of center, but I don't think I want to see him there. Obviously, he's kind of too big for that position probably. But at the very least, when you look at him, you can see a guy that can start. He has 28 starts in his career. You're not worried about him out there not being able to play. It's just, is he an upgrade over Dots? I think that's definitely questionable, but at the very least, if he pushes him to be a little bit better, to kind of get back to where he was even those first 9 starts of his career as a rookie, then we have a really great interior duo that can work together. And then if someone has to come out or if Herbig needs to go in there, I'm confident he can play at least.
Yeah, I think the floor here, Shane, is you're getting much more reliable depth.
Exactly.
Because
that was a huge problem for us. It is.
Yeah, and the Steelers, they were so fortunate to be the healthiest offensive line by a mile in the NFL last year. I mean, Mason Cole missed a handful of snaps, and that was essentially it. They were the healthiest unit in the league, and they were incredibly fortunate because you do not want Kendrick Green stepping in there. And I don't think that he's the guy that would have anyway. He didn't get a hat most weeks. So they would have had to have Jesse Davis come in and play.
Yeah, he was kind of the super flex guy, which is weird.
The offensive line depth was scary bad last year. And it's still worrisome. There's still 2 tackles under contract right now for the Steelers. So they got work to do. But this was a step in the right direction, I think. And either way you look at it, whether this is Dotson's replacement or Dotson's backup, I think at the very least, at least for the guard positions, you do have a quality backup who's got lots of experience there, whether that becomes Herbig or Dotson. And we know this team wants to get better running the ball continually. And so Dotson was a little bit consistent. He was up and down. I thought the highs were really high, but I thought the lows were also really low in terms of the penalties and the mental mistakes. And so I bet it becomes a situation, Shane, that those two battle it out in camp, kind of even though last year's I think it was a little bit more fraudulent with Kendrick Green and Kevin Dotson. Dotson, we knew it was going to win that one. This one's going to be a little bit tougher to call because it is borderline starter money, but it's very cheap end starter, and the contract is extremely reasonable. They can get out of this deal. It's $4 million this year. They can get out of the contract next year and only have a 1 point something million dollar cap hit, or a dead cap money hit. And so not too much at all so far.
You have a question, looks like, in the chat here from.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I do. I think it's the end of Kendrick Green, if I had to guess right now. And honest to goodness, I think we were so close to having Kendrick Green off the roster last year. And this is my honest opinion here. And this might not be factual. This is just what I think. If the Steelers did not spend a 3rd round pick on Kendrick Green last year, he would have been gone.
Yeah,
he was abysmal during the preseason. I was there for several days down at Steelers training camp, and just watching him get just bowled over in the one-on-one drills. He just doesn't have any anchoring strength. I don't think he has football strength in terms of that. And I said before, I was very adamant that if Kendrick Green works, he has to work at center. He has to work at center. And I actually just retweeted out my article that's over a year old now. And I tweeted that out just yesterday. And I said, I'm going to pull up this nugget again, because a lot of people thought that Kendrick Green could move to guard. he just did not have the size, girth, or power for it. And we saw that, and he got humiliated. So yes, I do think that Green is off the roster. Shane, does your opinion different from mine at all there?
No, I think he's definitely going to be off the roster, especially with the signing of Herbig. I think he's going to be the primary backup at guard. You normally only dress 7 offensive linemen or maybe 8, depending on the team.
Yeah.
Herbig's probably going to be that backup, or Dotson, whoever wins that job. And then ideally, and this goes to his other question he asked about, do we still need to address left tackle and everything? I think whether it's in free agency or hopefully in the draft within the first 2 picks, like you mentioned, that's probably going to be the 8th or 7th or 8th guy. It just depends on, who we draft. Yeah. And obviously you're going to hope that if you draft somebody in the first 2 picks, it's to start, and maybe a Dan Moore kicks out to be the backup tackle. But that's definitely something that has to happen. I don't expect him to add a tackle in free agency, at least nobody of note. But I could see them signing like a depth kind of guy just to have him or whatever else. But it's probably going to be looking at those first 2 picks or so in the draft.
I agree with you. And that's a great question there as well. And I agree, Shane. I don't think they add one in free agency. I think that does come to the draft. I think the visits kind of tell you that too. The Steelers met with 21 offensive linemen at the NFL combines. They had 6 formal visits there. And since then, even like they've got some box checkers already. Like the Steelers, they had a formal visit with Broderick Jones. They just met with Broderick Jones at the pro day. They are bringing Dawan Jones from Ohio State in for an in-house visit. I like both. And honestly, I think that within their first 2 selections, that's a position that should be addressed, because that's where you're getting the talent. That's where you're getting probably the long-term starter type player. Like, I'm a big Broderick Jones fan. I'm a big Paris Johnson fan. I don't know if either guy will be there. But I even like the next guys up, like Darnell Wright and Dawan Jones as right tackle prospects. I mean, that they're very solid football players. So yes, I do think that the Steelers address tackle, but I think it comes in the draft, and I think it comes within the first 2 rounds. I will even say, Shane, I'll be that bold.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much at this point. Like, it'd be very surprising if it doesn't happen. Excuse me. I do wonder. Again, and we'll talk about this here at the end when we talk about what we think the Steelers will do in the draft based on what they've done so far. But if it's not the first pick or the second pick, I'd be surprised if it happens at all. So we'll see kind of where things go from there. But I would say for sure that it's probably going to happen. So,
okay, great questions there. If you have any more for us, go ahead and drop them in the chat. Absolutely. We'll keep going here. All right, we got to Nate Herbig here. Let's move on. Larry Ogunjobi. I got some opinions on this one, Shane, and I'll let you go first, and then I'll bring up the rear here.
So my problem with this is I like him as a player, and I think that I would like to have him on the team. We talked about that. He's a player I would have liked to see back. We don't have just many guys that can play at defensive line at this point. Outside of Cam Hayward, it's just really bare right now. So signing him, in theory, is great. And I think that had the defensive tackle market, specifically just interior defensive line market, not exploded, if it didn't go nuclear, I mean, we're talking $20 million a year deals, 18, 7, like crazy amounts of money being thrown around, starting with Daron Payne being extended with the Commanders. That was just, I mean, I get it. It is what it is, but that's a lot of money.
Yep.
I think that's why, even though the money is still more than I wanted to spend, I understand why they paid what they did, because they needed somebody other than whoever they're going to bring in the draft, hopefully. And they already knew him. He played well for us. So the money, even though it's not what I wanted, I understand why the money is what it is. So I'm not as upset as I would have been had the defensive line market not exploded like it did.
Yeah, and if Steelers were the ones setting that market, I would have been furious.
Yeah, like, that's different.
Doing that.
That'd be different.
Even with that, Shane, there's part of me that's like, all right.
Yeah, it's still a lot
I watched
of money.
Larry Ogunjobi last year, and I think he's a solid football player. Don't get me wrong. It's just like you played 16 of 17 games. Now I know he wasn't healthy, but you played through some injuries. But you recorded 1.5 sacks during that time on 384 some odd pass rush snaps, 680 some total snaps. If I have these figures off the top of my head, I just looked at these like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So it's within 10%, give or take. I just think that Larry Ogunjobi is very much like almost like the first guy off the bench type of guy. Like, I think he should be
ideally on a great defensive line.
Especially. You're like your IDL 3, maybe. Yeah. He's not Stephon Tuitt. Like Tuitt was a far superior player. And I think that essentially everything that Tuitt did. And so I wish that Tuitt was still around. It would have been a phenomenal pairing still between these two. Yeah. And it just looks like, I think they overpaid here, Shane. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that doesn't come back to bite them. And I'll be fine with it. If Larry Ogunjobi gets healthy, if he kind of looks like he does In 2021, when he was on Cincinnati, he recorded 7.5 sacks. Still didn't grade out very well. Had some work to do as a run defender. I think we saw some flashes. It just wasn't very consistent from Ogunjobi last year. Any other 2 cents you want to add in for him?
Like I said, really, I think the money was high, and I think that if they can get out of it if they absolutely have to, like most contracts. But like, I do think that the potential is there, like you said, for him to live up to the contract. It's just he's gonna have to play more like he did 2 years ago to do it.
Agreed. And so we're talking over $9.5 million per year for Ogunjobi, who wasn't exactly like a quintessential player for the Steelers last year. So we're hoping that he takes a step up. Whether he will at age 29 or not, I don't know. I mean, he might have played some of his best years, but who knows? We've seen crazier things happen. Cam Hayward didn't become a Pro Bowler until age 28. So you never know what's going to happen. Next one up, Shane, Robert Spillane signs with the Raiders. Is there anybody super distraught over this one here?
So I think that the initial reaction that I saw was mostly like obviously positive, because it's like, all right, so now we're not signing him, so we have to sign somebody, right? And that ended up being correct, and we'll talk about that player in a second. But yeah, I mean, the problem is I don't hate Robert Spillane as a player. I think the problem is if he was on this team, he was going to get 1,000 snaps. So I'd rather him not be on the team, pretty much just for that reason. If he was going to get like 300 snaps for us next year, that's awesome, because 300 snaps, he can just go play with his hair on fire for 300 snaps will be good. But we know, had he come back, either they weren't going to sign anybody and just draft somebody, which they still probably will. We'll talk about that. But he was going to get 1,000 snaps. He was going to be the coverage linebacker for whatever reason they feel is necessary. And it was just going to be another pain for us to deal with. And luckily now, we don't have to do that. And the Raiders, they get a player that can play. I think it's just that he's not going to really improve anything for them, I don't think. But he gives them a body who can go out there and do stuff. So I'm kind of indifferent about it. And I'm definitely okay with the fact that he won't be on the team next year.
Your assessment is spot on. And that's exactly what I was going to say. If Spillane came back to the Steelers, he's going to play too much, and he's going to end up infuriating us because somehow he's always out there on coverage downs. Now, if the Steelers viewed Spillane like Tyler Matakavich, I'd love the guy because
be fine.
Yeah, you play in a very limited role on defense, and you're a core special team player, and I think that's what Spillane needs to be. He's not an athlete. He was not an athlete coming into the league, and so obviously, it as smart as you can be, and I think that he knows where to be a lot of times. He just doesn't have the athletic traits to get there. And so I think that he was a detriment in coverage, like all Steelers linebackers were last year, not trying to just single out one of them. They were all equally bad. So, and I think that Spillane deserves to be on an NFL roster. I will say that.
Absolutely.
He just doesn't deserve to play starter snaps.
1,000 snaps or however many he played last.
So that's a goal. I think you're going to end up being disappointed. I've got a few more here with us now. If you have another question, go ahead and drop it in the chat for us. We'll see if we can get to that. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, we got another one, Shane. I'm going into my intro already.
Yeah, you're starting to get. We got an important one.
I'm getting my head of my favorite one's coming up. All right, let's talk about Cole Holcomb. Now, I've watched some Holcomb, not super in depth, but I've watched a lot of this guy at Washington, and I like what I see. I mean, very good athlete, tested in the 96th percentile.
Yeah, it was 9.6.
The Steelers are
for those who like that.
Yes. The Steelers they're replacing Spillane and then some. Like I think that I try not to overhype free agent moves. Like last year, I was super down on like Miles Jack. I
had to try to be like, he was good in the past.
I know you tried talking about for me, but like last year, I think Miles Jack was coming off a down year. I legitimately think that Cole Holcomb is instantly the best off-ball linebacker on the Steelers. And I don't think that I don't think I'm crazy for saying that. It's not a high bar to clear.
No.
But we're talking about a guy with athletic traits. He's got pretty good instincts. He can sift through traffic around the line of scrimmage. He's not great in coverage, but he does have the lateral quickness, like agility testing. This guy tested like Odell Beckham, and that's not being Jesus. He actually did like it. So, and you can see those pop on film, his closing speed. I think in a lot of ways, Shane, when I was going back and watching some Holcomb games right after the Steelers signed him, I think in a lot of ways, he is kind of like the player that we wanted Devin Bush to be, that guy that can kind of fly around the field, take smart angles and get to the ball carrier in a hurry. And Holcomb does that very well. Now, the biggest thing is he is coming off a season-ending foot injury. He played less than half a year with the Commanders last year. And so that's something to monitor. Steelers have cleared him. And I think that he'll be ready to go. And so I don't think that should hold him back. He's 26 years old, right in the prime of his career. So I'm somewhat optimistically positive about this signing here, I think that this could be a pretty good one for him. And I think that can take maybe the worst position group on the Steelers and bump that up in a pretty significant way, especially if Pittsburgh plans to maybe draft a linebacker in the second or third round.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing about this, like you said, is the fact that he immediately becomes the starter for this team, like the primary linebacker. Now, again, that could, like, depending on who they draft, that he could be joined by someone that's not on the roster as well, which should be ideal. But he's immediately the 3-down linebacker for us, or he should be, right? And I think that even though he's not maybe at the same level as some of the other guys that got signed, like I would have really liked to see a David Long, especially for how much he got paid by the Dolphins, or some of these other linebackers that are getting that $5-6 million a year for 2 years. That really made a lot of sense. But I think Holcomb isn't that far off from some of them. And I think that he is still young, like you said. The athletic tools are there. I think he can get better in coverage just because, again, he has the tools to do it. And maybe getting coached up here will help him do that. But the biggest thing for me is our run defense. Even though I don't think he's a true like run stopper type, he can clean up a lot of the plays that go for 10, 15 yards that happened last year versus, getting him for 5 or 6 yards on some of these runs. And I think that's a big thing because you've talked about a lot. Explosive runs are very demoralizing for defenses, right? You do not want to give up that 20, 30, 40-yard play on the run, especially. This guy is one of those guys that can chase those guys down from the weak side or come downhill and really hit somebody hard and stop them in the hole that we don't really have right now. I mean, Robinson, you hope, can do that maybe to some degree, but he's, 7th-round rookie last year. And when he does try to do that, when we saw him a little bit last year, he whiffed a lot because he's just putting his head down and going. This is a guy who's a complete linebacker, I think, from the sense that he can play on all 3 downs, and there's room for him to grow. And that's a big thing that we don't normally see with the Steelers. When they sign somebody, it's usually for what they can do and not what they might be able to do in the future.
Exactly. And I think that the Devin Bush we saw wasn't the same one. I don't think that we saw at Michigan. I don't know what it was, if it was a mentality thing, if there was the knee still bothering him for whatever reason. I think that Cole Holcomb kind of plays like what Devin Bush did in college. And so, but we weren't getting that athleticism on field from Devin Bush. So where he was supposed to be best, he didn't offer hardly anything at all. And he was just late to react. And he didn't play with that extra fire and motor like that. So I think you will be getting some of that with Cole Holcomb. I'm excited to see what he brings in terms of like previous year signing Shane's, like Miles Jack, the trade for Joe Schobert, John Bostic, Mark Barron. He's better than all those guys easily to me. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, he's still a little bit inconsistent maybe from game to game, but I like the total package better at what he brings. And he's coming off of a pretty good sample play prior to the injury. And so I'm excited for that one. We'll see what he offers the Steelers this year. All right. Now, if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. And one more time, if you have a question for us before the end of the show today, go ahead and drop it in the chat and we will get to that. Just a few more things here, Shane, today. I want to talk about what's next for the Steelers. We've seen them make these moves, and now cap space is very limited. Do you see them doing anything else? And if so, what positions do you think that they could still potentially target in free agency?
I do hope that they do a few other things. I think one thing I'd still like to have them do, and this is just to make sure that in the event that they can't find this type of player in the draft at a reasonable spot, there's a player I already like a lot that I'm hoping they can get to fill this kind of role because I think he has more potential to be a pass rusher as well. But a true run stopper in the D line, right? That's something they don't have right now. And I think, again, Keanu Benton is obviously who I'm talking about from Wisconsin. I'm hoping that maybe we could be in play for him. But if not, I want to make sure this team has somebody who that is their primary role early on, right? You look at a guy like Ashawn Robinson from the Rams. He's one of the best run defenders in the sport. That's really what he does entirely. I think you could get him for pretty cheap. He's still on the market right now. But just somebody in that mold for, hopefully less than like $5 million-ish, $6 million-ish a year to do that, I think would be smart just to prevent you from having to worry about addressing it early in the draft.
Yeah, I agree. I think Ashawn would be a very wise move because then you have a guy that fills that hole. We're looking at things right now, and it's hard to project forward with some of the stuff, but it's like Chris Wormley coming off the ACL injury. Is he going to be ready? Would the Steelers consider signing him back in the summer? I don't know. He's a ways out, and I don't know where he's going to be at that point. He was kind of that long run defender type for them. In terms of like what they have at nose tackle, I'm not impressed with what the Steelers had there last year. I mean, I would have to assume Tyson Alulu is going to retire. Montravius Adams, I don't put a lot of stock in what he offers. And frankly, I don't know if he deserves to have a roster spot unless the depth is looking poor at the position. And so I agree with you there. I think a run stopper would be kind of necessary. I don't think that they would go like receiver or anything else because they're going to be getting Calvin Austin back.
At least not anything substantial, right? Like
Nothing. Yeah.
not for a role, the defined role at least. Yeah.
I would say so too. And Anthony Miller was even looking good. And so
Yeah,
maybe he
he
cracks a roster spot at the end. They are Miles Boykin is a free agent. And so I don't know what's going to be going on with that, but running back, I can't really see them doing anything with. They like Jalen Bourne. I think if they are to add one more guy, Shane, I think it's probably right there. I don't really see them doubling up on corner in free agency. I think they're very much in the market of taking one early in the draft.
Yeah.
So I think more or less, I think that they're pretty much done. If you had to predict right now, Shane, are they going to make one more decent size signing, like one more Nate Herbig level signing this year?
I think they could, and it's hopefully going to be one of two things: either the run stopping role on the D line, again, whoever that ends up being. There's a few guys out there that fit that. Or I'm still kind of holding out the Edmonds returns. I really want to see him come back. I don't want to lose him after he's developed. I just don't know what his market really is. I haven't heard any news about him. I know CJ Gardner-Johnson still has to go on the safety market. Jesse Bates obviously already got paid, but that's a whole different level of player. So I just don't know what it was going to take. What it's going to take to bring him back. If they can bring him back for $5 million a year, I'll sign him right now. Like I'll go to wherever he's at right now and I'll make him sign. Like that. It's good value for a player that you know and has really worked well. But outside of those two, I doubt it's anything that's like a true, like they're going to be a player starting for us / one of our key depth pieces. I doubt it.
Yeah, I agree with your take on Edmonds there. And like I said, last year I went for really cheap before the NFL draft. I'd love for him to go for that price again.
That'd be awesome.
Edmonds, I mean, if you're in financial trouble, you can borrow some money from your brother now. He just got
true.
So,
No,
for the Steelers' sake, I think that would be an excellent signing because he can play strong safety. He can come down in the box. I like him I think the Steelers should use him more often as a nickel linebacker.
I would love them too, because
I think that might be his, and he's not any smaller than like today's linebackers either. We're talking about a guy that came in at 6'1", 217, long arms. I mean, very JOK like of the Browns coming in, and so he can do some of those things. He's not a guy that's going to take the ball away a lot. We know who he is, and I'm comfortable with that at this point at the right price tag. But I agree with you there. I'm going to say no, Shane. I'm going to say that the Steelers are essentially done.
No, but I'd like them to. So that's kind of my dilemma there. So it's
and I think just mostly for financial reasons right now. You look at their cap situation they could maybe do one of those other signings and that would take all of their cap space. And now you got to remember, they still need $8+ million, sign the rookie draft class. And you need money, like normally like $6 to $8 million at a minimum going into the season. So
just for
at some point, at some point they're going to have to clear that up, whether that's an extension, a restructure, additional cuts that they haven't done yet. And so we'll see it. Maybe some of those moves don't come until after the draft at some point. So I'm going to say no on that one. And so Shane, let's bring us to our last question today, unless something else pops up here in the chat here before we sign off. Where do the Steelers go in the draft at this point? We look at how they've covered their bases for the most part. Some of those major holes that we saw at the linebacker position and next to Cam Hayward in the middle of the defensive interior, those are now at least filled with at least a stopgap player, and it gives them some flexibility in the draft. Does that change things for you? And if you had to just pick a position, I won't ask you to pick the player right now, but pick a position you think at this point the Steelers will target at pick 17.
So the first thing I will say that the position I think is going to be corner at 17. It feels more and more like the reason they signed Peterson over Sutton, I think honestly is partly because they expect or plan to draft somebody who they think will be their cornerback one for the next 7-8 years. And they want a guy like Peterson who's been all over the place. He's played in a ton of different schemes. He has all the knowledge you'd ever want. Can coach that guy up in his rookie season. I think that's actually a big part of what that move means. Can I say that for sure? Obviously no, but it would make a lot of sense, right? Because of the fact that he isn't a player that's going to be there for more than 2 years at the most, right? Maybe only next year. You want to take advantage of that as a veteran presence, and you want to give somebody who you hope can be, like I said, the cornerback one for you for a long time, all the opportunity he can to learn and get ready to take on that role. And you won't have to do it, hopefully, year one. You can be the 2 or 3, depending on what happens with Wallace or who wants to play where. But that would be ideal, I think, at this point. I do still think it's really between that and offensive tackle, though. I think it's going to be one of those two positions. You look at who they visited with, who they're going to visit with. It feels like it's going to be with 17 at least one of those two, and whichever doesn't get drafted at 17 probably is their first spot at 32. It just depends on kind of where the board falls for them.
You said everything that I want to say, so I shouldn't even say anything. I'm going first next time, Shane.
Yeah, you probably
I was going to
should,
say
yeah.
for the same exact reasons, but let me just give a little bit different spin on it this time. The Steelers cornerback outlook, even with Patrick Peterson, is scary. He's 33 years old. If you look at the mean age of the top 5 corners on the Steelers roster heading into training camp, it's 29 years old.
I thought.
They have nothing at that position. They have nobody to develop at that position. They have nothing to look forward to. I don't know what you think of Akella Witherspoon entering age 28 season, but his career has very much been a roller coaster ride. I think if he does get healthy from that hamstring injury, I don't think we'll see as bad of a football player as we saw in the first couple of games. I'm hoping of more so the guy we saw at the end of the season in 2021. However, I don't think that that's a guy you should put a ton of stock in and say, yeah, we're going to this guy's our future. They don't have that guy in the roster. And so I very, very much think that they're going to be enthralled with players like Joey Porter, Devin Witherspoon early in draft, maybe Cam Smith, Deontay Banks. I think that, and so much so, Shane, and the cornerback class is so strong that you can make a case for the Steelers to say, yeah, we're going to narrow right on this, and whatever corner is there and whatever one's the highest on our board, that's what we're taking. We've seen them do that kind of stuff in the past. Unfortunately, like with Artie Burns, this is a much, much stronger cornerback class.
Different class.
I would feel much better, much different about it this year. And my wild card, just like you said, is offensive tackle. The Steelers have Chukwuma Okorafor and Dan Moore under contract right now. Trent Scott's a free agent. Jesse Davis is a free agent. Even to pay for a mid-tier like swing tackle in free agency, it's not cheap.
It's not.
And so I see them addressing that in the draft. I see them addressing it with one of their first 2, maybe 3 picks. Maybe they wait until the 3rd pick. I almost feel like if they don't do it at 17, they'll do it at 32 with a Dawan Jones or with a Anton Harrison or something like that. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. My preference, Shane, if I were to pick, I really prefer them to go the offensive tackle route. I think it's better for Pickett in his career path. I think it's going to give the offense a boost that averaged 18.1 points per game last year. And so it obviously depends on who's on the board, what's there at that time. But if they are to get fixated on 2 positions this year, cornerback and offense tackle, I'm fine with that because these are 2 strong positions in this draft. Maybe only next to like tight end, which is a great tight end class as well. Anything else for us, Shane? You good?
Really, the main thing that I wanted to touch on too is like, ideally, I think that if a Broderick Jones or someone like that is there at 17, I think even though I'm not as high on the tackle class as a whole in terms of their potential, I think Jones is the most potential of these guys, which is why I'm comfortable taking him at 17. Almost everybody else, I'd rather either wait on or pass on at 17. At this point, even a guy like Paris Johnson I like, but I think he's kind of a finished product in the sense that he's going to be a good tackle, but is he going to be a top 10 tackle in the league? Probably not. I'd much rather them take the best corner available, especially if obviously Joey Porter Jr. is there or any of those guys really that's in that range, and then address with like a DeJuan Jones, who I think is going to come in immediately and just be like a wall, right? He may never be like a top 10 tackle either, but you can take him 32 probably and just expect him to just wall guys off and keep Pickett clean on that side at least. So that I think would be my preference in terms of order of picks, but there's a lot of ways they can go right, I think, which is great because we know that they tend to fixate on things like you said. So as long as they fixate on one of those 2 positions, they're probably going to come out okay in the draft because it's going to have a lot of depth and a lot of players that I think, especially at tackle, the first like 6 guys, I think all can play, which is why I really need them to take one in the first 2 picks because otherwise I think they're not getting anybody you can really play. But I'm feeling more and more confident that that's going to be the case as we kind of get closer to things. So
I do too, Shane. And 3 picks inside the top 50. I don't think we can go too wrong this year, especially with the way that the needs are going to line up. Steelers have their bases covered. We'll see what happens here. And that's coming up. It's right around the corner here. So thank you for joining us today on the Still Curtain podcast. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.